Is there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your input, and we'll go into the intelligent buildings. We have 3 persons to come: Mr. Fred Gordy, Scott Langen, Tom Shercliffe. Okay. If you guys would just go ahead and introduce yourselves and your positions, and you're welcome to proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senators, legislators, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Scott Lannigan. I'm with Intelligent Buildings. My current position is General Manager of Government Services. One of my main clients is the federal government, GSA, with their cybersecurity and smart buildings program.
Yeah, I'm Tom Shercliffe. I'm a principal, and just a little bit more about the company briefly for Fred is that for 15 years we've done only this, and that is consult to large portfolio owners on smart buildings and building cybersecurity issues, including corporate, commercial, government, utility, college campuses, and military, and that includes the GSA for the U.S. government, Canadian House of Commons, Fort Bragg, Fort Jackson, Fort Benning, Kirtland, Maxwell Air Force Base, and so a wide variety of government and commercial types of clients. Fred?
Fred Gordy, Director of Cybersecurity. I've spent the past 20 years specifically in the building control space and cybersecurity.
We're ready.
Gentlemen, you're welcome to proceed on whoever wants to go first.
Thank you, Chairman. On the first page of the deck, there are 3 things that we want to keep in mind as we kind of go through this discussion. The state of Arkansas building systems does have vulnerability in their building systems. Like most of the rest of the industry, the challenge is you don't know everything that you have across the state and all the details around that. And finally, it's not really IT's area to address this. They do a good job. They're partners. They're important to it, but it's not necessarily the type of vulnerabilities that they're used to dealing with. We've already covered this. The chairman covered it, but systems, when we talk building systems, we're talking HVAC, elevators, parking, life safety, meters, and those kind of things.
Yeah, and also another point is that it sounds really simple, but they're since the 1980s they became digital, which simply means they work on computers, and that's where things started to change. So I wanted to clarify, this is not a smart building problem. This is a 40-year problem since building systems became digital or computerized.
Yeah, and because they're computerized, they're now, a lot of them can be connected to the internet, and they require a very significant management, even below the IP level, of how those are done. Just in a very basic 30-minute search, Fred here identified many vulnerable points for entry into the DIS system, and in fact there were multiple where when you went into the IP, there was no login. You were directly into the system.
Which want to just add to the point that Scott made. It's not just that Iran and other bad actors would want to get to this from the outside. Since they're computerized, a lot of the issues are from the inside in terms of how the systems are configured, whether they're backed up, whether they have passwords. That's more of an internal problem than an external problem. So you have both sides of it.
So if we go to the building control cybersecurity risks, I think a lot of people are familiar with this. Life safety incidents, one of the big things that the federal government's worried about, and one of the reasons why they worry about protecting their data, is if a bad actor can get to your data, they can start to understand when people are in buildings, when they're using them, and that makes them a more vulnerable target. That's just an example. Productivity loss, obviously, we've heard about the cities and counties around the nation that have had buildings and their systems hacked, and they've lost the ability to do their job and shut down the buildings. Obviously, legislative noncompliance, if you can't service your people, then you're not in compliance with what you're trying to do. They can rev up equipment. There was a situation where a system was actually air-gapped, and it still got penetrated by somebody bringing in a laptop with some type of malware on it, and they destroyed the equipment. That's actually very common. That is one of the biggest risks. Finally, if it is on the state network that your data resides on, if you have one gap, then you can end up getting to that data, and that's obviously a bad situation. And finally, if any of these happen, obviously that's not something that you want to have happen in your constituency. That. And really, again, we're not laying blame. The real blame here is just the way the industry grew up, right? Building control contractors, this is not, though they try, these are mechanical engineering people that are coming in and trying to do digital and cybersecurity and work with computers, and that's just not where their skill set is. And honestly, until recently, a lot of customers weren't asking for that, so they never worked on that skill set.
Yeah, also there's this issue of fragmentation, and unlike IT, specifically even in a building like this, you have multiple different contractors that report up differently. So, for example, the parking control contractor doesn't manage your HVAC system, and your lighting control contractor doesn't manage the elevator system. So the fragmentation is tremendous.
So now you have all these different organizations, and oh, by the way, they have personnel turnover, or as contracts end, those companies leave and you get new companies in. And so they don't really have any policies. Contractors don't create the policies. If you don't have a policy around this that is dictated across the state of this is how we're going to do this, you end up with some pretty significant issues. Sometimes it's just the type of users, how many users, what their access is, passwords. There are situations we've seen multiple times where a vendor will use the same login information across multiple customers and buildings. It's just the way they do it makes it easier on their technicians. Outdated software.
Yeah, I mean, a good example, just like your iPhone or your smartphone, the software updates periodically. The same thing happens in building control systems. And if you have a multiple generations old software, you can have problems, again, internally, not just externally.
Now, one of the real issues we see a lot of times, if they do get in, how good are your backups? When are your last backups done? Because if you have to go back 2 to 3 weeks, that may be a problem for the way you've set up your building. On the next page, and again, this is really the point that we want to make. It is not IT's problem to fix. They are a partner in doing this, but it really is a different culture. Between the way that facility management and those building controls operate, they use different protocols, they use completely different technologies, they use different hardwares. It's a different realm.
Yeah, we're just to clarify, IT plays a very important role, certainly for the remote access and the things that are IT. And what we want to clarify is that at some point they cross over from traditional IT into the building system itself. And in addition to the culture, it is literally different technology. IT tools cannot see inside if there's a password on your elevator control system. It crosses over a different realm.
And, these are managed from a procurement standpoint, and from a management standpoint of how you manage these systems is completely different. A lot of IT systems have about a 3-year refresh cycle on them. Building systems may have a 15-year. And so how do you keep those up to date? How do you keep them running and make sure that you're patched and ready? To that point, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, which is the governmental agency that provides guidance around this type of technology, came out with a recent statement.
Yeah, Fred, you want to...
So this year, in 2019, around mid-year, what you see in this handout are the exact words from NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And if you would, bear with me to read them just so this drives home the point. Many IoT devices, and IoT, building control system technology, is inside that, interact with the physical world in a way conventional IT devices usually do not. Many IoT devices cannot be accessed, managed, or monitored in the same way conventional IT devices can. The availability, efficiency, and effectiveness of cybersecurity and privacy capabilities are often different for IoT devices than conventional IT devices. And the final statement, for some IoT devices, additional types of risk, and this is important, including safety, reliability, resiliency, need to be managed simultaneously with cybersecurity and privacy risk because of the effects addressing one type of risk can have on the other. In other words, sometimes, and we see it all the time, is IT types of solutions actually inject risk and failure. So you have to be careful with that.
Fred, can you briefly describe a recent example where an IT testing tool was put on?
Yes. Large media group in New York City we did work for. We went through and did the commissioning of their building control devices. We worked with IT, great department, good partner, but we explained to them how you needed to go in and do your scans because these devices are sensitive. And so they went in, did a Qualys vulnerability scan, and there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 devices in this one building. They knocked off 60% of them, which required the vendors to come back in and manually restart all these devices. And it was simply because they were just doing a Qualys vulnerability scan. And if so these devices thought that those particular scans were more like an attack than they were anything else. They just can't take that amount of information.
Thank you.
So, again, this is a very brief kind of deck, but the points that we wanted to get through with this brief deck is there are vulnerabilities. We found them, and there's obviously could be dire consequences behind those, more than people think, other than somebody flipping your lights on and off. And like the entire industry, the challenge is this is a big animal to handle. It takes a concerted effort to figure out all the different pieces and parts that are there and what you have and how it's configured and how they're connected. And then finally, there's no blame here. This is because the industry changed and didn't grow up the right way and put the right pieces and parts in place. IT is extremely important in supporting this, but it goes past where their skills need to go. And the facility management side, they're trusting a vendor that just doesn't have the skills to help them overlap with IT.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this is for 40 years, just to replay that, these digital building systems have been designed, installed, configured, and maintained by a value chain that is not IT skilled. So architects, engineers, contractors, property managers, facility managers are, again, designing, installing, and maintaining millions of digital systems. So that is an industry-wide condition. And that's why we've been focusing on this in our business, because you just have to go find out everything that you have and then create policy that you historically have not had for these building contractors and start turning the battleship.
Thank you. We're finished if there are questions.
Got questions from members. There's a lot of questions in your eyes. So let's go ahead, Representative Brown.
On forget which screen, the screen that says no policy requirements, and I see here on the list no log trail of access. I think that's a really big problem when you don't know who's accessing your system. And I'm curious, are you considering doing a systems and organization controls report, or have you already done that?
So process and controls type reporting is very common in IT, and that is something that is not very common in facilities and building systems. So that what we do a lot of in the industry for those government and military organizations we spoke of is to go in and look and see what is there and how it's configured and get all that information sort of manually the first time, and then work with those organizations to create policy requirements that might include a log trail of access.
Follow up. So you would be looking at how third parties would be interacting with our state-owned systems?
Yes, so every building control system presumably has a contractor that manages and maintains and configures that system. And part of what we would want to know is who is it and what have they done to it, and then create Arkansas policy going forward for how every single contractor must configure and maintain their system internally.
So are you suggesting then that these third parties should provide the systems and organizations control reports to the state before we hire them?
A form of that. Again, that is not a very common thing in the building controls world like it is in the IT world, but I would suggest strongly, and we have done this, is to create a policy that you have that is a requirement to bid or to get contracts to maintain state systems.
Thank you.
Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Representative Brown kind of covered some of what I wanted to cover, but I wanted to go back to the point where you all said IT cannot fix this. So I guess, are we talking about, you stated policy, so we're talking about a policy in place when we do procurement? Is that what you're referring to as far?
Certainly, I would have requirements for procurement, but you have a lot of systems in place today. What would be best is to create a policy and start working with even your existing controls contractors to do these basic things on the no policy requirements checklist there, so we can start right away, even for those that are in place.
Okay. Now, have you all already done this assessment as far as, or?
No, not for the state.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so I guess if we put the policy in place, I'm just trying to follow some reasoning as far as who, if IT is not going to be, I guess, the one that's going to be the clearinghouse for this, who would you suggest would be the clearinghouse, or in other states, how is this handled?
If I could just clarify again, IT, we may have misstated that, IT plays a very important role, particularly for remote access, very important, and this has been the experience with all of our government experience, that IT plays a very important role in the external access, the remote access. But what is typically not something IT does is get into the building controls contractor system configuration policy. That's a mouthful, but literally every single system, elevators, HVAC, lighting, parking, meters, everything, every one of those systems can have separate passwords, too many users, too many super users, backed up or not backed up. Every single one of them has those elements to it. So apart from the remote access and the important role of IT, we want those all to be set up the right way.
Gotcha. Okay.
And real quick, to your question, generally, the way we've seen it, at least at the federal government, the people that share and enforce that policy is the facility management group, IT, but it's a very close partnership between IT and facility management to manage that piece of the puzzle, because it's a significant overlap.
Okay, I get it. All right, thank you.
Any other members? Go ahead. Senator Mark Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, you said you've done this work for GSA. And obviously, GSA is big. They're everywhere, all over the country. If you could you kind of walk us through a typical, I guess we're talking about study analysis or whatever of a situation. And again, without giving away your proprietary things, or all the hackers that are watching us on the live stream figure out where to go, could you kind of walk us through in an overview, 30,000-foot view process of what the state would need to do to begin implementation of this particular level of building security?
Yeah, actually, the beginning process is not that complex. It is very important, as simple as it sounds, to have an inventory of exactly what systems and what revisions and models, and then what contractors, because then that tells you now what you're going to apply your policy to. The other thing is that in these inventories and site assessments, you are also looking for network connections that you may not have been aware of, because again, a 40-year situation, there are DSL lines and telephone lines and all kinds of leftovers, so you're also looking for that.
Okay. I assume that, I'll try to say this without insulting anyone, some vendors are not equal to others as far as how well they handle security, and I'm not saying that it's not to criticize any vendor, and it could be someone sold a state-of-the-art system to the state 10 years ago, and obviously that's not state-of-the-art in 2020. Is that part of the thing, is your familiarity with the systems and the vendors and how, hey, back 10 years ago this was really good, but it's, the hackers have gotten smart and it's more vulnerable now. Is that part of the process?
Yeah, and that's important because, and that's where the partnership with IT is so important, because they know the networks and the remote access, and companies like ours understand many, many different control systems and vintages and history. So you can look at a system that's 10 or 15 years old and say, this is running on a server that uses a Microsoft operating system that doesn't exist anymore, and it's still sitting there plugged in. So if you try to upgrade it or unplug it, the whole thing is going to collapse. So it is important to understand the history and the vintages and the different types.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Chair?
And this may be more of a comment than a question, or maybe I'll figure out a question to throw in there. Y'all had mentioned during your briefing that you just did a 30-second trial, if you will, and you found vulnerabilities within our systems. And obviously, we just heard testimony from Arkansas Building Authority, but one thing for us to keep in mind is the buildings that the Arkansas Building Authority operates is actually a very small portfolio of all the buildings. So we're talking about all the universities and the schools, municipalities, county government, so state agencies. So when we as a state are looking at, this is not just one or two buildings. I mean, we're talking literally hundreds of buildings here. What is the best way for us as lawmakers to try to approach this? Do we need to be, I don't know, I guess that's what I'm asking. What should we be saying? What questions should we be asking? What steps should we be taking to lay out this statewide policy that y'all are recommending that we evidently do? Do we need to start with an inventory? How do we proceed from here?
Is that a question for us?
Yes.
So typically it's a simultaneous process. You have to do this inventory because you don't know what you're going to be applying policy to, and it's just chopping wood. You got to get out there and do the right kind of inventory. And at the same time, there are, again, that slide that with the checks with the X marks on it. A policy that is even the most basic policy is a great starting point, because if there's no policy that says you have to have passwords, you have to limit the number of authorized users, you have to back it up. I mean, these very basic things, that is a place to start with policy. Now, of course, it can get much more sophisticated as you make it your own, and we work with IT, but the inventory and the policy can come simultaneously, because very quickly after the inventory, you're doing a reasonably low-cost thing, and that is asking and requiring the contractors to just adhere to the policy for these basic things. So simultaneous is the answer.
Okay, all right. And any of you that have served on the audit committee know how challenging just the backups and the passwords can be. So.
Representative Ease?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In one of the first key points here, it says the state of Arkansas building systems are highly vulnerable. Have you scanned the buildings? I mean, do you already know that?
Yes, sir.
How many did you scan?
Well, let be really clear. We have not gone into any systems, and Fred can just describe how you can do a search.
The approach that we used would be just like any hacker would do. We use some, let's just say they're like Google-like search engines, and we ran some scans across the world, basically, and found hundreds of your buildings, hundreds of devices. And to something that Scott said earlier, not to get in the weeds, but there are devices that do not require a username and password, and we were able to hit those. Now, what we do is called knocking on the door. We don't go any further down, but those devices were exposed as well. And underneath those devices can be thousands of devices.
How much would it cost to do if we were to do this deal, how much would it cost to scan all of the state's buildings? How much money are we talking about?
So real quick, one thing, because in preparation and talking with folks, one of the things that we're going to have to figure out, first of all, is a complete inventory of all the buildings. We were not able to get that type of list. What we could do is kind of give you an idea, like just a general building, whether it's big or small, a deep assessment, going in, taking a look at everything, coming back with reports and helping to develop the policy off that, somewhere around $25,000 a building. But obviously, the more buildings that there are that we do, we can create economies of scale and spread that.
Representative Love, you got a question?
Okay, so, yeah, I think I get, all right, so about a couple of months ago, I went down, or several months ago, I went down to Georgia, and we talked about cybersecurity at the Georgia cybersecurity system. And so what you all are talking about or referring to, I know that, let's set policy aside, but are you a group, because I'm trying to figure out what you do, I haven't kind of Googled you, and so are you all testing systems to make to see where there are issues and then reporting them back to us?
Yeah, that's
and
correct.
Then you're going to do ongoing testing, correct?
That's correct, and maybe just a descriptive phrase rather than cybersecurity. The things that we've talked about with the control systems and the contractors might be better called vendor risk management.
Yes. Okay, I got you. All right, I see where we're going. All right, thank you.
I got a question. You're talking about two different things. Your building systems is your HVAC and your elevators and your lighting and things like that. You're not talking about your online presence, but there can be crossover in those systems in their hardware and software, correct?
That's exactly right, and it's a very important point because, as we were saying, there are two worlds. You're describing a building control system, let's call it the dirty fingernails, right? The HVAC system that is computerized and it runs in its own, world and its own technology. And that's important for the policy and the configuration. Then, as you were indicating, that can be connected now to a network to get you to the internet. Now you've gone into the IT side of it, so you've got both to deal with, if that was your question.
So it seems to me the simplest way is to have those independent of each other's on servers. I'm not a computer. I mean, whenever I went to school, it was green screen, so that was our computer and a pencil and a calculator. But I mean, why would we need you guys to tell us that we need separate servers for those systems?
Yeah, really, when you go, every single system, as we were mentioning earlier, can be configured by every single separate contractor. So some may have different passwords. Some may think 123 or admin is fine. Some may have a complex one. Some may be backed up. Some might not be. Some may have 50 authorized users because nobody's ever taken anybody out of the system. That happens in every single separate system with every single separate contractor. So it's not just putting them on another server. It's how they're set up, every single one of them.
Now, are you talking about on the internet side, or are you talking about on the building system side?
That's a really important question. So on the building system side, so let's just suppose for a second the internet just went away. If we have all these thousands of state building control systems that are not backed up, do not have passwords, have old software, have servers that are about to fail, you have an operational risk just that way. Forget Iran and China.
Most of those systems are manual. They have a manual possible override in their systems. It's not all controlled on a computer. Is that not correct? I mean, maybe we need to get our people back up here, but there's some separations, and you guys are, the sky's falling, and I'm not buying it, okay?
I understand. So, very quickly, to answer your question, their systems, some of the older systems are running pneumatics, and then with some electronics that have been put in place. And you're absolutely right, those systems could be run manually. The newer systems have what they call a supervisory controller, or the brain, like a York chiller, anything in a central plant. And those devices are the ones that that you need to worry about. And those are the ones that can, if.
hang on a second, I'm
Yes,
getting
sir.
some feedback. Somebody down there shut off their mic, so, yeah, pull yours closer and
Okay.
the other two, yeah,
Is that better?
yes.
Okay, sorry. So, anyway, there's the supervisory controllers that have brains in them, basically, and those are the ones that can, if someone were to get into it, they could turn a boiler into a bomb, they could wreck a piece of equipment, cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's the ones that, it's not just about do you lose control, it's do you lose control and are people inside of there that are going to do damage to the system.
And Fred, that's since the 80s, roughly?
Yeah, since late 80s.
Thank you, gentlemen. Is there any other members have any more questions or co-chair? All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Seeing no more, we appreciate your time.